So it just turned out to be fortuitous. So I'll talk about water a little bit, use two examples from Africa, perhaps talk a little bit about the measures to address issues related to water and water scarcity and stress. And then out of that derive some take-home messages, particularly emphasizing the region's continuing needs. Okay, geography once again. The lower panel is an indication of population in Africa, some at the time of the independence in the early 60s. And the upper right-hand corner shows the growth of population. You can see where the red spots are. But the basic point to be made here is that the continent itself is now close to 1 billion people. And therefore, it is a very significant population in the context of the world. And a significant population that is growing extremely rapidly. Here is a projection of an actual statistic of the global population curve increasing rapidly, and the little green blurb in the lower right-hand corner is the African population. And the thing to note here is that the growth rate in Africa is very, very high. So here is a cartoon, which is the left-hand panel there, which shows the greenhouse gas emissions cumulative by different nations. And you can see where all the fat cats are in the north, and where all the not so fat cats are, which are all in the south. And Africa happens to be that little constricted nipple-like thing in the middle. Tanzania, where I come from, sits at that constriction. Clearly, the emissions are very low, yet the vulnerability is very high. And the vulnerability is not purely due to climate change. The vulnerability is due to multiple stressors in the system: poverty, limited access to capital, technology, infrastructure, very poor infrastructure, degrading ecosystems, huge amounts of conflicts. So here is a cartoon, another cartoon, a statistic which is somewhat old now, showing all the multiple stressors in the system. And you can't really read in these bars, but there are a number of countries that are stressed in here. The top one, deforestation, has got some 33 countries being stressed. The actual number, if you were to redo this statistic today, would show that the water scarcity and water access to potable water, which are the bottom two lines, would be much, much, much longer than we could accommodate in this graph. Here's another cartoon showing people affected by natural disasters over the last 3 decades. And you can see right away that drought, famine, food problems, and even epidemics are huge issues all across Africa. The circles represent the number of millions of people affected, and I will not go into details of this. Clearly, I borrowed these slides from various projects that we work on, including the strategic partners that we have with the United Nations Environmental Program and others. You can't read this. You are not expected to read this. The arrow points to one sector called water. And this is an IPCC projection showing in the bottom right-hand line the global annual mean temperature increase and the amount of stress created in different sectors, whether they be water, ecosystems, food, coastal zones, etc., etc. But the water issue is one cross-cutting issue that permeates all of these sectors. You stress the water, you stress everything else. So the IPCC has clearly pointed to the issue of water as a big problem. This is a busy slide. Let me explain that a little bit. The upper left-hand map shows all the risk issues in Africa. The little water droplets, which you can't see from this distance, exactly parallel the kind of disasters map that I just showed you. But on the right-hand side is a graph of various countries that are facing water scarcity. And the long blue bars are the ones in the past where water was available, and the darker bars gradually going leftwards are the water scarce regions. And you can see uniformly almost every country in there is essentially in the water scarce zone now. So approximately in the next decade, a half of that billion people will be at water scarce and stress kind of a situation, and perhaps even more with time, depending upon epidemics and other things that flow from water. Okay, so all of that was to give you the message that the water is a huge issue all across Africa. You cannot meet the Millennium Development Goals unless you deal with the issues of water demand, management, and governance. And so what I thought I would do is to give you 2 examples. The arrow points to Lake Victoria. And I thought I'll show you the example from what is one would think of as a water scarce zone. It's the largest freshwater lake in Africa. This is a graph of the population as it has grown from 1960 and projected all the way up to 2015. As compared to the African population, and I already pointed out to you earlier, here we go. The African population growth was very large. The population growth around Lake Victoria is even larger. It is so large that the projection is that within the next 10 years or less, there will be approximately 250 persons per kilometer square in the Lake Victoria Basin. That density is equivalent to the density in Bangladesh and in the Nile Delta. So here is a set of cartoons going from 1960s to the 70s showing the growth of population around Lake Victoria. And you can see that there has been a huge change. And of course, along with this comes not only population growth, but needs of providing goods and services, the degraded landscape, the issues of degraded waterscape, and also related issues of providing a sustained living for people around it and maintaining ecosystem goods and services. Now, the graphs that I showed you started from where that lower red arrow starts from what, 1960. The water levels in Lake Victoria were relatively stable till about 1960. They rose all over the tropics. There was increase in precipitation in early part of 1960s. This graph reflects that partly and also reflects that in the late part of 1950s, Lake Victoria was dammed up in order to produce hydroelectric power. So it started, the lake levels went up partly in response to that. But since then, there has been uniform decrease in the water in the lake over the same time period where the population has grown that I was showing you. So consequently, what is happening here is that the population that is hugely dependent upon water in that part of the world is now increasingly facing huge amount of water stress in what is really a water-rich area. And it's not only water stress. These communities are also facing the projections of extremes and extremes in the precipitation in the next 10 to 15 years, and we'll have to deal with issues of floods, the issues of waterborne diseases, the issues of sustaining goods and services in an area where the infrastructure is very poor. Approximately half the population does not have potable water, nor does it have electrical supply. How am I doing? I've got lots more slides to show in that case. She says it's fine. Okay, I think I should change the take a little bit and talk. Clearly, people need to adapt. We have been talking about adaptation. Here's a definition of adaptation that I use and I like. That it is actually an adjustment in practices in such a way that you not only take care of climate change, but you also deal with the issues of damages and the benefits and opportunities that come along with climate change in other places. It's not just gloom and doom. And so you need to evaluate in terms of adaptation, what are the risks, what is underlying vulnerability, what is overall adaptive capacity, and how to take advantage of what is going to be a terrible situation in future. So I want to change my take a little bit and give you an example from a little bit further north. Lake Victoria is that little bluish dot. A little further up, the circle is in Sudan. We all know about Sudan. We keep hearing terrible stories from Darfur. One of the projects that we have carried out in Sudan deals with adapting to drought conditions in Sudan. And in this context, we worked in 3 small communities. Drought is widespread. Very vulnerable groups. They are nomads, pastoralists, and few agricultural types. There are frequent conflicts between these 2 groups. The agriculture types, in response to pressures from the West to grow biofuels, would like to have the landscape available to them. So they go and burn what is pastoralist landscape, reduce the grass cover. This leads to conflicts and war. So we decided we'll do 3 community level case studies in the region and ask for what makes the system more viable. How do you really restore landscape? And what kind of local and indigenous knowledge you need to use to make